Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to thank Senator Blumenthal and Senator Boxer, who will be joining me in this conversation in just a few minutes. Mr. President, I think now more than ever, after we have emerged from this very damaging and completely unnecessary government shutdown, the American people want us to focus on jobs and the economy. It is what every poll says, it's what every one of our constituents say, and it's absolutely what is needed at a time when families continue to struggle to make ends meet. But instead of working with us across the aisle on jobs and economic growth, it seems like some Republicans are now focused on something else entirely: politics. In fact, Mr. President, in just a short while, the senior senator from South Carolina is going to be introducing a bill here that is blatantly political. A bill that not only undermines a woman's access to her doctor, but also restricts an array of reproductive health services. So we are here today to make one thing abundantly clear, and that is that this extreme, unconstitutional abortion ban is an absolute non-starter. It is going nowhere in the Senate, and those Republicans know it. Mr. President, I'd like to think that over the last 40 years, since the historic decision on Roe v. Wade, we have moved on from debating this issue. I'd like to think that after 4 decades, many of those who want to make women's health care decisions for them have come to grips with the fact that Roe v. Wade is settled law. After all, the many signs of progress are all around us. This year, a record 20 women are serving here in this body. 1 year ago yesterday, women's power and voice at the ballot box was heard loud and clear. In fact, last year, when a Republican candidate for office thought that rape was a political talking point, that idea and their candidacies were swiftly rejected, thanks in large part to the voices of women. And just this week, we saw women in Virginia resoundingly reject the Republican candidate for governor and his misguided and outdated agenda for women's health. So sometimes it's tempting here to think that times have indeed changed, that maybe, just maybe, politicians have realized that getting between a woman and her doctor is not their job, that it's possible that right-wing legislators have a newfound respect for women's health care. But, Mr. President, the truth is that the drumbeat of politically driven, extremist, and unconstitutional laws continues to get louder. And apparently some of our colleagues on the other side of this aisle want to make some noise about this so that their adoring audience of right-wing radio hosts and columnists and activists are satisfied. In fact, an example of just how blatantly political this restrictive ban they're going to introduce is, one of the actual participants in the press conference to introduce their bill today had this to say to Politico about the strategy behind doing it. She said, and I quote, it's a much better thing to be campaigning on than rape and incest these days. Well, Mr. President, that is an insult to women everywhere. And it is most certainly not what the senator from South Carolina has called, quote, a debate worthy of a great democracy. This is a debate we've had. A woman's access to her own doctor is settled law, and we are not going to let attacks on Roe v. Wade like this one change that. And Mr. President, I'd like to remind all those even considering supporting this bill that real women's lives and the most difficult health care decisions they can ever possibly make are at stake. I want us to consider the story that Judy Nicastro from my home state shared so bravely with the New York Times last summer. In an op-ed she wrote, just days after the House passed a bill that was virtually identical to the one that is being introduced today, Judy talked about being faced with what every pregnant woman's worst nightmare is. In describing the news that one of the twins that she was carrying was facing a condition where only one lung chamber had formed and that it was only 20% complete, Judy captured the anguish that countless women in similar positions have faced. My world stopped, she wrote. I love being pregnant with twins and trying to figure out which one was where in my uterus. Sometimes it felt like a party in there with 8 limbs moving. The thought of losing one child was unbearable. She went on to say, the MRI at Seattle Children's Hospital confirmed our fears. The organs were pushed up into our boy's chest and not developing properly, and we were in the 22nd week. Mr. President, under the bill that's being introduced, the decision that Judy and ultimately had to make through a very painful time and conversations with her family and consultation with her doctors would be illegal. The decision to make sure, as she put it, quote, our son was not born only to suffer, would be taken from her and given to politicians. Mr. President, I'm here today to provide a simple reality check. We are not going back. We are not going back on settled law. We're not going to take away a woman's ability to make her own decisions about her own health care and her own body. Women are not going to go back to a time when laws forced them into back alleys and made them subject to primitive and unsanitary care. And senators like me, and Senators Boxer and Senator Blumenthal and others who join me in opposing this effort are not going to go anywhere. Advocates and doctors who treat women every day and know that their health care must be protected are not going to go anywhere. Women who continue to believe that their health care decisions are theirs alone are not going anywhere. And by the way, the Constitution is not going anywhere. And therefore, this bill is not going anywhere. This bill, like attacks on Roe v. Wade before it, will eventually be lost to history. But I will tell you, millions of American women will not forget. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor, and I welcome our colleagues here to this debate.